It happened faster than I could process. One moment, I was inside folding laundry with the windows cracked open to let in the spring breeze. The next, there was a sharp, echoing bang that shattered the piece like glass underfoot. My heart froze. I didn't even think, I just ran. Out the door, down the porch steps, toward the sidewalk where the sound had come from. I didn't see her, at first. All I saw was Karen, standing stiff like a statue in the middle of the lawn, clutching something in her hand. The sun was gleaming off it. A gun. My stomach flipped. I looked past her, and then there she was, my daughter, face down on the pavement, her little pink hoodie soaked in red. My mind refused to accept it. It was like the world had gone mute, the colors drained, the sky frozen. Just her body still. Too still. I screamed her name and dropped to my knees beside her, hands shaking, afraid to touch her, afraid not to. There was blood, so much of it, seeping into the cracks of the sidewalk, where just hours ago she had been drawing chalk flowers. Her wheelchair had tipped over, lying awkwardly on its side, one wheel still spinning in place like the world hadn't noticed what just happened. I kept calling her name over and over again, my voice breaking, begging her to open her eyes. But she didn't move. Her breathing was shallow, each gasp a knife to my chest. I looked up wild-eyed, desperate for someone to do something, and there was Karen, still standing there, unfazed, like she was waiting for someone to congratulate her for taking out the trash. "What the hell did you do?" I screamed, my voice cracked and hoarse. "What did you do?" Karen blinked, slowly. Then she shrugged, lips twitching like this was just another Tuesday morning HOA complaint. And she said it. Those 5 words I'll never forget for as long as I live. I didn't even see her. That's what she said. After shooting my disabled daughter in the back, she didn't even see her. Like my daughter was invisible. Like her life meant so little that it didn't even register. And in that moment, as I held my baby in my arms and listened to the distant wail of sirens coming far too late, I realized something deeper than rage. This wasn't just about a gun or a neighborhood or a deranged HOA president with a god complex. This was about power, about control, about what happens when people like Karen think they can get away with anything, because they usually do. But not this time. This time, I wasn't staying silent. Not when my daughter nearly died for existing. Not when someone looked at a child and only saw a violation of rules. Not when Karen looked and claimed she didn't even see her. We moved into that neighborhood 2 years ago, hoping for a fresh start. After everything we'd been through, hospital visits, rehab sessions, the endless specialist appointments, we needed peace. My daughter, Ellie, was born with cerebral palsy, and though it limited her mobility and partially affected her hearing, it never touched her spirit. Ellie is the kind of child who lights up a room with her smile before she even says a word. She has this way of looking at the world, like every flower matters, like every bird song is a gift, and despite her wheelchair, despite the stares she sometimes gets from people who don't know better, she never complains. She thanks the mailman by name. She draws chalk butterflies on the sidewalk for the neighborhood kids, and she always insists on feeding the birds outside our house every morning, even when the weather's bad. I used to watch her from the kitchen window, wheels crunching gently over the pavement as she made her way to the bird feeder, a bag of seeds balanced in her lap and determination in every push of her hands. The neighborhood itself looked perfect on the surface. Rows of well-manicured lawns, pastel mailboxes, and white fences that all matched just a little too perfectly. It was the kind of place that had a monthly newsletter, a community garden, and little block parties in the summer, things that made you feel like maybe, just maybe, you were safe. But what we didn't know at first, what no one really told us, was how tightly the homeowners association ran this place, and how one woman, in particular, pulled all the strings. Her name was Karen Matthews. If Stepford ever needed a queen, it would have been her. She was always dressed like she was headed to a board meeting, pastel cardigans, pearls, that stiff smile that never quite reached her eyes. She'd knock on your door with a pie in one hand and a violation notice in the other. That's how she introduced herself to us. Actually, Our welcome gift was a reminder to keep the front hedge under the community regulation height, even though it had been trimmed the day before. At first, I chalked it up to her just being particular, but it didn't take long before her obsession with control started to zero in on Ellie. It began subtly. She once asked, with an overly sweet voice, whether the wheelchair ramp we'd installed had been formally approved. Another time, when Ellie was outside drawing with chalk, Karen walked by and muttered something about graffiti and setting examples for other kids. I didn't confront her then. I just smiled tightly and wheeled Ellie back inside. But I noticed how she watched us from her window. Sometimes her blinds would twitch, and I'd feel her eyes on us, especially when Ellie was outside. It got worse when Ellie started making friends with the other neighborhood kids. Karen sent out a passive-aggressive HOA bulletin reminding parents to keep unsupervised minors and their equipment off shared sidewalks, clearly referring to Ellie's wheelchair, even though we were always nearby. Despite everything, Ellie loved it there. She found joy in the smallest things. She'd leave hand-painted rocks by the mailboxes to cheer people up. She'd wave to every dog walker like they were royalty. Her favorite thing was going down to the community pond with her sketch pad, drawing ducks and cattails. She once told me, "It's quiet here, Mom, the kind of quiet that feels like hugging." And so, for her sake, I kept biting my tongue. I filed the HOA notices, nodded through Karen's comments, and did my best to ignore the tightening grip of her invisible rules. Then came the incident with the holiday lights. We'd put up soft blue string lights on our porch in December. Ellie had helped me untangle them and insisted they looked like glowing icicles. A day later, we got a violation. Karen claimed the lights were non-conforming in color and brightness. I attended the HOA meeting, frustrated but polite, and asked if an exception could be made given Ellie's condition. Karen's response? A smile and a suggestion that perhaps families with special needs require special communities. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. As if we were a burden. As if Ellie's existence required an apology. It wasn't long after that Ellie's joy started to dull. She still smiled, still did her drawings, but she began to ask questions like, do people not like me because I can't walk? Or why does Miss Karen always look angry when I go outside? I reassured her, told her she was perfect just the way she was, but it burned inside me. Every time Karen narrowed her eyes at Ellie, every time a note was slipped into our mailbox about clutter on the porch when it was just her chair cushion drying the sun, I felt the slow build of something dangerous: resentment, fear, helplessness. Karen wasn't alone in her judgment either. Her influence stretched across the HOA, like ivy, pretty from far away, but suffocating anything it touched. A few neighbors avoided us after the lights issue. One parent pulled their son away from Ellie during a sidewalk chalk session, saying they were late for dinner even though he'd just started drawing. It wasn't overt hatred. It was that cold, suburban avoidance, the kind that cuts without leaving bruises. Still, we tried. Ellie's therapy was going well. She was learning to communicate more through her tablet. She was even practicing going further on her own, always within the line of sight. I wanted her to feel independent, to feel proud, and on good days she did. She'd go out in the morning and water the sunflowers we planted. She'd sit on the sidewalk with a juice box and wave at joggers. It was her way of saying, I belong here too. But Karen never stopped. She started taking photos of Ellie outside, claiming she was documenting repeated rule violations. She even once asked if Ellie was registered as an emotional support minor, whatever that meant. I filed complaints. I spoke to other neighbors. I even considered moving. But where would we go? Ellie had finally started to feel settled. She had her ducks, her drawings, her space. I told myself we could weather it. That people like Karen don't have real power, not when the truth is on your side. I didn't realize that people like Karen don't need the truth. They just need fear, silence, and a neighborhood too polite to stand up. Looking back now, all the signs were there. The weaponized bureaucracy, the constant surveillance, the attempts to isolate. Karen didn't just dislike us, she resented us. Because Ellie wasn't part of her perfectly curated community. Because disability didn't fit into her HOA color-coded rulebook. I didn't know it then, but the day Karen stood in her yard holding that gun, something in her had already snapped, and every violation notice, every sideways glance, every passive-aggressive comment was leading to the moment she'd finally cross a line that no one, especially not a child, should ever have to pay for. At first, I tried to convince myself that Karen's behavior was nothing more than the overreach of someone who had too much time and not enough joy. A lonely, bitter woman, perhaps, clinging to control like it was the only thing giving her life structure. But over time, it became undeniable this wasn't harmless micromanagement. It was obsession, and it was escalating. It started with minor complaints, little printed warnings from the HOA showing up in our mailbox about the position of our trash bins, the height of a flower pot Ellie had decorated, even the visual inconsistency of her rainbow-colored wheelchair umbrella. I remember laughing at the absurdity of that one. Visual inconsistency in a neighborhood where pink flamingo lawn ornaments and solar-powered gnomes were somehow acceptable? But the laughter didn't last long because soon, Karen wasn't hiding behind HOA paper. She started delivering her complaints in person. I'll never forget the first time she yelled at Ellie. It was a Tuesday afternoon, bright and breezy. Ellie was out front with a neighbor's little girl, using sidewalk chalk to draw animals and their names, part of a reading game her therapist had taught her. I was standing just inside the screen door when I heard the sudden, sharp voice, "This isn't your canvas." Karen snapped from the end of our driveway, hands on hips, her lips pursed like she'd bitten into something sour. Ellie froze. She looked up, confused, a purple piece of chalk trembling in her hand. "I told you people already," Karen continued. "This sidewalk isn't yours. Keep your scribbles on your side or don't do them at all." Before I could step out, Karen was already storming off, muttering something about entitlement and special treatment. I ran to comfort Ellie, who looked as if she couldn't understand what she'd done wrong. And truthfully, she hadn't. But for Karen, it wasn't about rules. It was about control, and Ellie's joy disrupted the little empire she'd built in her head. I tried to address it calmly. I called Karen the next morning, hoping to talk like adults. Her voice on the line was sugary and smug. "Oh, I'm so sorry if your daughter felt attacked," she said in a tone that screamed insincerity. But perhaps if she were supervised more consistently, these unfortunate misunderstandings could be avoided. I can't have the neighborhood looking like a daycare. I bit my tongue. She was laying it out plainly now. Ellie's presence wasn't just unwanted, it was an inconvenience to her curated vision of the world. After that call, I installed a small blue wheelchair accessibility sign near the driveway. Nothing flashy, just a simple marker to let others know this was a space inclusive of Ellie's needs. The next morning it was gone, cleanly removed. A neighbor later told me he saw Karen with a screwdriver in hand at dusk. The pettiness evolved into something darker. Karen began walking her dog past our house more frequently, lingering long enough to observe what Ellie was doing. She took photos with her phone when Ellie played in the yard. When I confronted her once, calmly asking why she was photographing a child, she claimed she was documenting repeated violations for the HOA. Violations of what? I asked, keeping my voice even. Children being outside? She gave me that smirk again, the one where her mouth smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. You'd be surprised what's technically prohibited. It's all in the bylaws. When I said her behavior was making my daughter feel unsafe, she responded, "Well, maybe she shouldn't be out there alone then. Accidents happen, you know." That phrase stuck with me, accidents happen. It wasn't the words. It was how casually she tossed them out, like she was warning me. A few weeks later, Karen called the police. Ellie had gone out to feed the birds, as usual, and I was nearby trimming the hedges. A patrol car pulled up, lights flashing but no siren. Two officers approached, polite but confused, saying they'd received a call about suspicious activity. I asked what the activity was. One of them read from the dispatch notes, an unlicensed mobility vehicle obstructing a public sidewalk and creating a safety hazard. My jaw dropped. She had reported Ellie's wheelchair as a hazard. I looked over at my daughter, who was offering seeds to a nervous pigeon, and I felt a shame I didn't deserve. A neighbor came out and vouched for us. The officers left without further issue, clearly aware they'd been dragged into something ridiculous. But the damage was done. That night, Ellie asked me if the police were mad at her. She didn't understand. She hadn't done anything wrong. All she wanted was to see the birds. From that day on, Ellie started hesitating before going outside. She would peek through the window blinds and ask, "Is she out there?" Sometimes she'd skip feeding the birds entirely. Her world, once so open and warm, was starting to shrink under Karen's shadow. That broke me in ways I can't describe. My child, who had fought through so many challenges to build confidence and independence, was being bullied back into fear. I contacted the HOA directly and filed a formal complaint. I detailed everything: Karen's verbal outbursts, her photo taking, the police call, the missing sign. I sent emails called Followed Up. I was told the matter would be reviewed and that Ms. Matthews has always been a valued community leader. In other words, nothing would happen. Karen's behavior became more hostile, more brazen. She confronted Ellie once when I wasn't around, telling her that she shouldn't be in the way and that kids like her need fences. Another time, she stopped her car inches from the end of our driveway as Ellie was rolling down it, stared her down through the windshield, then reversed and drove off. No words, just intimidation. And I swear, there was a faint smile on her lips. That was the moment I knew Karen didn't just dislike Ellie. She resented her. Her presence, her wheels, her smile, it all represented a freedom Karen didn't believe she deserved. Around this time, Karen began referencing her firearm. Subtle mentions, always in passing. During a neighborhood meeting, she said, "In this day and age, you can't be too careful. That's why I carry. You never know who's going to come rolling up." The word rolling lingered in the air like smoke. Everyone laughed nervously. I didn't. Another time, she told a group of us while pointing at her purse, "This bag's not just for lipstick, if you know what I mean." The subtext wasn't subtext anymore. It was declaration. She had a weapon. She wanted people to know. And she wanted me to know. I started documenting everything. I set up a small security camera pointed at the front yard. I made logs of every interaction, every incident. But even as I tried to build a case, I couldn't shake the gnawing fear that something worse was coming. Ellie's therapist noticed her sudden anxiety, her reluctance to go outdoors. She asked Ellie to draw how she felt. Ellie drew herself in her wheelchair inside a big gray box, with eyes peering through cracks in the wall. That image destroyed me. My bright, hopeful girl was drawing herself trapped. I told myself that people like Karen don't really go through with their threats, that it was all power play, empty intimidation, that she wouldn't actually do something. But deep down, a voice kept whispering, "What if you're wrong? What if all her warning signs, the controlling behavior, the obsession, the weapon, what if it was all leading somewhere?" I just never imagined where it would end. Not with sirens, not with blood, not with my daughter lying broken on the sidewalk while Karen stood above her and claimed she didn't even see her. But looking back now, every moment of rising tension was a drumbeat, and we were marching straight toward a horror I never thought I'd have to face. It was the kind of day that tricks you into believing the world is gentle. The sun hung low in a cloudless sky, casting a warm golden light across the neighborhood lawns, as if trying to bless the silence before it shattered. Birds chirped lazily on rooftops, and a faint breeze rustled through the spring blossoms like a whispered lullaby. Ellie had been in a good mood that morning. She'd woken up early, her eyes bright, asking if she could go outside and draw. She loved this time of year, the season when the birds returned and the sidewalk was no longer cold beneath her wheels. I helped her pack her little art kit, the one she kept tucked in a recycled cookie tin, and handed her a juice box as she slipped on her hoodie. "I'll stay close, okay?" I told her, kissing the top of her head. She nodded. "I just want to draw the daffodils near the mailbox," she whispered. "They're finally smiling." I watched from the front door as she wheeled herself down the gently sloped ramp we'd installed after the city denied our request to lower the curb. Her hair shimmered in the light, the wind tugging playfully at the strands as she stopped at the edge of the yard. She always parked herself near the mailbox. She said the flowers felt friendlier there. I could hear her humming, something she did when she was completely at peace. It was the kind of sound that made everything else seem less important. Like if you just stood there long enough and listened to that melody, nothing bad could happen. I went back inside, thinking I had a few minutes to finish folding laundry and pour a second cup of coffee. The window over the sink was open, letting in the scent of grass and the distant perfume of Ellie's lavender chalk. I heard a car start somewhere down the block, the muted thud of a screen door slamming shut, and the rhythmic creak of Ellie's wheelchair as she adjusted her position. Then nothing. And then, without warning, everything changed. A sound ripped through the air like a hammer cracking bone. Sharp, violent, final. For a split second, I didn't even register it as a gunshot. My body reacted before my brain did. The mug fell from my hand and shattered across the kitchen tile as I sprinted toward the front door. The world outside had gone eerily still. Time fractured. My heart was slamming in my chest, and every breath felt like it was clawing through concrete. I remember the flash of something shiny in the driveway. I remember Karen standing there, frozen, both hands in front of her, a pistol hanging limply in her grip like she didn't know how it got there. And then I saw Ellie. She was lying on her side, twisted unnaturally, her wheelchair tilted, her art tin spilled across the pavement like a shattered offering. There was red, so much red. It was pooling beneath her, soaking into the sidewalk, blooming like a cruel flower around her small body. For a moment, my brain refused to accept it. I ran, screamed her name, dropped to my knees, so hard I didn't feel the concrete rip my skin open. Ellie! I shouted, "Baby, I'm here. I'm here." But she didn't respond. Her eyes fluttered once, barely open, and then closed again. Her little hand was curled, still clutching the orange chalk she'd been using to draw a daffodil. I could feel my own heartbeat in my throat, in my ears, pounding like drums in a war I didn't understand. Blood. So much blood. My hands were shaking as I pressed them to her back, trying to stop the bleeding. There was a hole, ragged and deep, just below her shoulder blade. She'd been shot from behind. The bullet had torn through her as she sat, quietly drawing flowers. I screamed for help, screamed until my voice was raw, but the neighborhood stayed silent. No one moved. No one came running. I could hear the birds again, now, still chirping like nothing had happened. Then Karen spoke. I didn't see her. Her voice was calm, distant, like she was commenting on the weather or a misplaced trash can. I didn't see her, she said again, this time a little louder. My head snapped toward her. Her face was blank, eyes wide, lips pressed tight, the pistol still hanging by her side. She startled me, she added, she was in the way. My mouth dropped open, words failing me as rage and disbelief warred inside my chest. You shot her, I gasped. You shot my daughter. Karen took a half step back, suddenly defensive. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. I didn't know she was there. I wanted to hit her. I wanted to scream until the universe ripped in half. But all I could do was hold Ellie, rock her gently, and whisper, "You're okay, baby. Stay with me. Please." I fumbled for my phone with bloodied hands, dialing 911 while trying to keep pressure on the wound. I don't even remember what I said. I just remember the dispatcher's voice trying to stay calm, asking for our address, telling me an ambulance was on the way. It felt like hours before I heard the sirens. I watched the EMTs run toward us, their faces contorting when they saw the scene. The child, the blood, the wheelchair on its side. They worked quickly, cutting away fabric, applying gauze, stabilizing her fragile frame. One of them kept repeating, "Stay with us, sweetheart," while the other tried to get a line in her arm. I stood frozen, numb, as they loaded her onto the stretcher and wheeled her into the ambulance. They asked if I wanted to ride with her. I nodded, climbed in, and looked back only once. Karen hadn't moved. She was still standing in the exact same spot, staring at the crimson stain on the pavement like it was some abstract painting she didn't understand. She made no effort to approach, no apology, no remorse. Just that same empty stare, like she was trying to convince herself that she wasn't the one holding the smoking gun. The ride to the hospital was a blur of machines beeping and paramedics shouting numbers I didn't understand. I held Ellie's hand, or what I could reach of it, and kept whispering stories to her. Her favorite ones about the birds at the pond, about the daffodils blooming early, about the chalk rainbow we never finished drawing. I told her she was strong. I told her she was brave. I told her I needed her to come back. The hospital was chaos. Trauma team waiting at the doors. Bright lights. Scrubs. Voices talking over each other. I was pushed back, told to wait, told they'd do everything they could. Hours passed. I sat in that sterile waiting room, covered in her blood, trembling, nauseous, completely alone. No neighbors came. No HOA representatives. No one. Just silence. Later, an officer arrived to take my statement. I told him everything. Every violation. Every threat. Every incident leading up to the shooting. His expression remained unreadable, but I could see the tension behind his eyes. He asked if I thought Karen had shot Ellie on purpose. I couldn't even speak. I just nodded, tears streaming down my face. She didn't want her here, I whispered. She didn't want her anywhere. The next morning, a nurse told me Ellie had made it through surgery. The bullet had missed her spine by millimeters. They weren't sure yet about long-term damage, but she was alive, breathing, fighting. I went to her room and found her unconscious, hooked up to tubes and monitors, a tiny oxygen mask resting over her mouth. Her hand was bandaged. They had to pry the chalk from her fingers in the ore. I sat beside her and wept. Karen was taken into custody that night, but released on bail within hours. Pending investigation, they said. Unclear motive, they said, but I knew the motive. I lived the motive. My daughter represented something Karen couldn't control, something that disrupted her illusion of perfection. And so she erased her, or tried to. That evening, the HOA sent out a community-wide email expressing deep regret over a tragic misunderstanding. They called Ellie's shooting a safety incident. No names, no ownership, no justice. And just like that, everything changed. The birds still sang. The flowers still bloomed. The neighborhood lawns stayed perfectly trimmed. But innocence bled out on that sidewalk. And my daughter, the light of my life, was left fighting for hers because one woman couldn't stand to see a child who didn't fit her mold. One shot, one shrug, one sentence. I didn't see her. And everything we knew shattered. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, under the hum of machines and the sharp scent of antiseptics, I sat by Ellie's bed and watched the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest. Each breath she took was a war won. Her body lay fragile and bruised, half swallowed by tubes and monitors, her tiny frame dwarfed by the machinery meant to keep her alive. The doctors had done everything they could. They removed the bullet, stabilized her bleeding, and placed her under constant observation. But they couldn't promise anything beyond that. It's a matter of time, one of them had said gently. She's a fighter, but the trauma is deep. We just have to wait. And so I waited. I held her hand, brushed her hair back from her face, whispered every story I could remember just to let her know I was there. But beneath the grief, a different fire was beginning to burn. One fueled not by sorrow, but by fury. While Ellie lay broken in a hospital bed, the world outside was already twisting the truth. Karen had given her statement to the police just hours after the shooting. According to the report, she claimed that she had felt threatened, that an unknown individual was lurking near her property, and when she confronted the figure, she feared for her safety. She said she thought someone was trying to break in, that she didn't realize it was a child, that the figure moved suddenly and she reacted instinctively. Every word of it was a lie, but a strategic one. She wrapped her actions in the language of fear, of confusion, of mistake, because people understand fear. People forgive fear, especially when the person claiming it looks like Karen clean-cut, articulate, middle-aged suburban HOA president. And my daughter? She was reduced to a silhouette, a figure in motion. A threat. The police seemed reluctant to push back. At first, I assumed they were simply overwhelmed, another shooting in America, another round of paperwork. But then I began to see the hesitation. The investigator handling the case kept asking strangely phrased questions. Was your daughter ever aggressive toward Karen? Had there been previous altercations? Could Ellie have startled her? I blinked in disbelief. My daughter could barely speak above a whisper and used a mobility device to travel 6 feet at a time. What part of her existence was threatening? But it became clear Karen was already building her narrative. And worse, the system seemed ready to buy it. The HOA sent out another email. This one called the incident a tragic misunderstanding involving 2 residents. It praised the swift response of law enforcement and offered prayers for our family. But nowhere did it mention Karen's name. Nowhere did it call the act what it was, an attempted murder. Instead, it was framed as if 2 neighbors had simply stumbled into unfortunate circumstances, like it was a weather event. I emailed the HOA board directly, demanding that Karen be removed from her position. I shared a copy of the hospital report, the photos, the police file, everything I had. I was met with silence. A week passed, then another email arrived. The board has reviewed your concerns and at this time finds no violation of HOA bylaws regarding community conduct. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I was done being polite, done waiting for justice to work itself out. I printed every violation Karen had filed against us, every record, every timestamp, and I compiled them into a single document. I added photographs of Ellie's chalk drawings, the wheelchair accessibility sign she'd removed, and the screenshot from our home security camera that showed Karen standing in our driveway with the gun still in her hand. After the shot, unshaken, staring at my child's fallen body, I took that evidence to a local journalist who had covered disability discrimination before. She listened to my story in stunned silence. They're trying to erase her, I told her. Not just her voice, but the whole truth. The story went live 3 days later. The headline was direct: Disabled child shot in HOA dispute, allegations of cover-up raise alarms. It featured Ellie's photo, smiling, holding her art kit in her lap, with sunlight pouring across her cheeks. It showed the security footage still, excerpts from the police report, and a scathing editorial that questioned the HOA's silence and the police department's handling of the case. Within 24 hours, it had been shared over 10,000 times. Comments flooded in: support, outrage, sorrow. People wanted answers. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. Ellie wasn't invisible. But with the light came the darkness. Karen began her own smear campaign. She hired a PR consultant, released a carefully worded statement through her lawyer claiming she had been harassed by our family, that Ellie's presence had been the source of multiple conflicts, and that she had received threats and vandalism since the incident. She suggested that Ellie had ignored verbal command to move, that she may have posed a danger to her dog, who was startled. It was nonsense, all of it but effective nonsense. Soon, news outlets began using neutral phrases like alleged events and unconfirmed claims. Karen even went on a local TV interview teary-eyed, saying, "I have children too. I would never hurt a child. I was afraid." The worst part? Some people believed her. Not everyone, but enough. We started getting cold shoulders from a few neighbors. People who once waved at Ellie now crossed the street. Someone spray-painted the word liar on our fence. One night, a rock was thrown through our living room window. The police said they couldn't prove anything. Tensions are high, the officer said. Best to keep a low profile for a while. But I refused to back down. I launched a petition to have Karen removed from the HOA. I hired a civil rights attorney and filed a lawsuit, not just against Karen, but against the HOA for complicity and discrimination. I called every disability advocacy group I could find and shared Ellie's story. I organized a candlelight vigil in front of her house. Hundreds of people came, strangers, allies, families with children like Ellie. We lit candles for justice. for visibility, for every child told they were too different to be safe. That night, a local senator showed up. He gave a brief speech, promised an inquiry into how communities handle residents with disabilities. This is not just about one little girl, he said. This is about how we choose to see each other or not see each other at all. And through it all, Ellie began to heal. Slowly, painfully. She spent weeks in the hospital, then months in therapy. She was quieter now. Sometimes she'd flinch when doors slammed. She didn't like being outside alone. But when I showed her the vigil photos, she smiled weakly and said, "I didn't know so many people cared." I looked into her eyes, and I made a silent vow. I would not let her become a footnote in someone else's lie. I would not let Karen bury the truth beneath a mountain of polished PR and HOA newsletters. I would fight for Ellie, for every child like her, for the truth. The world had tried to look away, but I was going to make sure they saw her. And when they finally did, when the spotlight burned through the veil of HOA power and polite cruelty, I would be standing there, ready, with the truth in one hand and my daughters in the other. The turning point came quietly, an unexpected message late at night from a neighbor I barely knew. Her name was Naomi. She lived 2 houses down, a quiet woman who rarely attended HOA meetings and kept to herself. Her text simply read, "I think you'll want to hear this. I've been holding on to it for a while, but I can't stay silent anymore." Attached was an audio file. My hands trembled as I played it. The quality was grainy, but the voices were unmistakable. Karen's voice rang out, clear and smug, in the middle of a phone conversation. "I swear if I see that damn wheelchair on my sidewalk one more time, I'll handle it myself. No one in this neighborhood respects rules anymore. I don't care if she's 5 or 50. If she doesn't move, I will make her move. I have my ways." The file ended in a short, ugly laugh. I sat there stunned. Rage curled in my chest like a fist. There it was, not just proof of intent, but a glimpse into Karen's mind, her raw contempt. She hadn't been scared. She hadn't been surprised. She had been planning it, talking about it like a game, a nuisance to be cleaned up. The next day, Naomi came over in person. She stood at my door with tears in her eyes, clutching her phone and a trembling conscience. "I should have said something sooner," she whispered. She was always ranting to people. I didn't think she'd actually, but when I saw what happened to Ellie, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I hugged her. I thanked her. And then I handed the file straight to my lawyer. The tide had shifted. We began digging deeper. My attorney, a sharp, relentless woman named Callie, subpoenaed Karen's phone records and emails. It wasn't easy. Karen's legal team pushed back hard. But persistence paid off. What we found shocked even me. Hidden beneath her polite HOA emails and neighborhood bulletins was a thread of messages between Karen and a friend from another HOA group in a neighboring town. One message stood out like a flare in the dark. "You wouldn't believe the circus act on my block." A disabled girl in a neon wheelchair cluttering up the whole street. "I've already reported them 5 times. If the cops won't clean it up, I'll just remind them why this is a safe neighborhood. Some people only learn when they feel the heat." That word, heat, followed by a fire emoji. It was all there. Her disdain, her racism-coded dog whistles, her obsession with control, and her willingness to escalate. It didn't stop there. A neighbor who had previously stayed neutral suddenly stepped forward with security footage of his own. This one from a week before the shooting. It showed Karen pacing her driveway late at night, weapon holstered at her hip, talking to herself, rehearsing. The audio was faint, but you could just make out the words. One wrong move. Just one wrong move. She was preparing for it, hoping for it. She didn't want to feel safe. She wanted a target. All of this, every twisted detail, was brought into the case. The court proceedings moved faster than expected. Karen, who once stood proud at every HOA podium, now sat behind a wall of lawyers and blank expressions. But no spin could mask the avalanche of evidence. Callie presented it masterfully. First the voicemail, then the messages, and finally the damning video. Each exhibit stripped away the layers of Karen's carefully crafted facade. She wasn't a frightened neighbor. She was a control addict, a manipulator, a woman who viewed rules not as safeguards, but as weapons. And then came the final blow, a witness no one expected. One of Karen's closest former friends, Denise, who had served on the HOA board alongside her for years, walked into the courtroom and asked to testify. Her voice cracked as she told the jury how Karen had confided in her after the shooting. She said it wasn't about the girl, that it was about proving a point, that the parents had been a problem from day one, and that someone had to put them in their place. Denise paused, voice thick with guilt. She didn't even ask if the girl survived. She just asked if the footage had been deleted. The courtroom was dead silent. The prosecution rested with that. No dramatic closing, no theatrics. Just the truth, laid bare, undeniable. Karen's defense tried to pivot, claiming mental distress, paranoia, and neighborhood pressure. But the jury saw through it. They saw the emails, heard the audio, watched the footage, and read the messages. They saw a woman who had become so consumed by her illusion of order and superiority that she shot a child to protect it. The verdict came quickly. Guilty on multiple counts: assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment of a minor, and attempted murder. When the sentence was read aloud, I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I looked at Ellie sitting beside me in her chair, her hand in mine, eyes wide but calm. And I whispered, "They saw you. They finally saw you." The fallout was swift. Karen was stripped of her HOA position, her reputation crumbled, and her name became a symbol of suburban cruelty gone unchecked. But more importantly, Ellie's story sparked something bigger. News outlets that once parroted Karen's narrative now ran exposés on HOA abuses and discrimination against disabled residents. Lawmakers introduced new community oversight bills. Disability advocacy groups cited our case in campaigns demanding inclusive urban design and stronger protections. For me, justice was never about revenge. It was about truth, about peeling back the polished exterior of a woman who had weaponized civility, who had hidden behind rules and lawn signs while harboring a heart filled with venom. It was about making sure no other parent would ever have to pick their child up off a bloodstained sidewalk and be told it was an accident. And now that the lies were exposed, now that the truth stood in the light for all to see, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: relief. Not because the fight was over, but because Ellie was finally safe, and because the world could no longer pretend she was invisible. The courtroom was silent when the judge returned from chambers. Everyone sat stiffly, eyes fixed on the worn mahogany bench where the gavel would soon fall. But my gaze remained on Ellie. She was seated beside me, wrapped in a soft gray shawl, her wheelchair framed by the morning light filtering in through the high windows. Her fingers fidgeted gently in her lap, but her chin was raised, eyes steady. The months of healing hadn't been easy, not on her body and not on her spirit. The wound in her back had closed, but the one in her heart still echoed in her drawings, her cautiousness, the way she flinched when footsteps approached too quickly. But today, she wanted to be here. "I want to see it," she'd said quietly that morning as I brushed her hair. "I want to know it's real, that it's over." And so we came, together, prepared to face the final chapter of a nightmare no child should ever have to endure. When the judge read the sentence, I barely heard the words. It was as though the courtroom itself exhaled, the tension uncoiling all at once. Karen Matthews, former HOA president, suburban queen, self-proclaimed enforcer of order, was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 15 years in prison without the possibility of early release. There was no apology from her, no tearful plea, no final gasp of regret. She stood there stiff, shoulders drawn back, face blank like stone. Her carefully curated image had crumbled. Her name, now synonymous with cruelty, her legacy burned into the headlines as a warning, not a triumph. But justice had many faces that day. Her neighbors, those who once nodded politely at her during meetings and forwarded her complaint emails without question, now sat with folded arms and lowered eyes. One of them, a woman named Susan who once helped draft HOA policies, approached me outside the courthouse with tears in her eyes. I believed her, she said. I thought she was just keeping the neighborhood clean, keeping it safe. I didn't know. I didn't want to know. I nodded, not out of forgiveness, but out of recognition. That was the hardest truth we had uncovered through all of this, that people will believe anything as long as it doesn't disrupt their comfort. Ellie's suffering had been inconvenient to them, until it became undeniable. Karen's home, once the centerpiece of the block, was vacated within weeks. The HOA board, under public pressure and legal scrutiny, was dissolved and restructured entirely. New leadership vowed to include inclusive policy training, disability awareness workshops, and a permanent seat on the board for residents with special needs or accessibility concerns. It wasn't just about punishment, it was about change. That's what I had always wanted. Not revenge, not headlines, just change. Just a world where my daughter wouldn't be seen as a burden or a violation of aesthetics, but as a child worthy of safety, respect, and joy. Ellie, still on the slow road to recovery, began to smile again in small moments. She started drawing, not just at home, but outside. Her favorite bench near the neighborhood pond became her studio again. Her chalk colors returned, brighter than before, bolder. She no longer looked over her shoulder when someone walked past. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, I sat beside her and asked how she was feeling. She didn't answer right away. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wrote something, she said. You can read it if you want. It was a letter. In her careful, slanted handwriting, it read, Dear people who were scared of me, I am not scary. I'm small and I like flowers. I don't move fast. My wheels squeak sometimes, but I'm not a danger. I'm not a problem. I'm just a kid who wanted to draw birds and be outside. I don't understand why you hated that, but I hope now you see me. I hope now you believe I matter. Love, Ellie. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried. Later that month, we were invited to speak at a disability awareness conference. I stood on stage, hands trembling, voice breaking as I told our story, not the story of what was taken from us, but of what we reclaimed, our truth, our voice. I ended my talk with words I didn't know I had in me until that very moment. I don't want revenge. I want accountability. I want safety for every child who's different. I want people to care before it's too late, before another sidewalk is stained red, before another family has to teach their child that some people will hate them just for existing. The room stood in silence, then erupted in applause. Not for me, for Ellie, for every child she now represented. Karen will serve her time, and eventually the world will move on. But Ellie's strength, that quiet, unyielding grace, will ripple far longer than Karen's cruelty ever could. Because in the end, this wasn't just a story about a child who survived a gunshot. It was the story of a child who refused to disappear, and of a world finally learning how to see her. Time has a strange way of moving after trauma, slow, at first like wading through molasses, every hour stretched and heavy, and then somehow it speeds up, carrying you forward whether you're ready or not. Seasons changed. The flowers Ellie once loved to draw bloomed again, even brighter the following spring. The chalk stains returned to the sidewalks, this time joined by new colors and new little hands. Neighbors who once stood distant now encourage their own children to join Ellie in drawing rainbows and birds and silly faces. The pond she once sat by in silence is now a place where people gather, not just to enjoy the view, but to remember what nearly happened in their backyard. The community has shifted. Karen is gone. Her house sold, her name scrubbed from newsletters, her power stripped. In her place is something fragile but hopeful, awareness. It didn't come easily, and it won't fix everything, but it's a start. The new HOA board is more diverse, more human. They don't just talk about fences and lawn heights anymore. They talk about belonging, about accessibility, about the responsibility of community. As for Ellie, she continues to heal. There are days when the shadows of fear creep back in, when loud sounds make her flinch or unfamiliar faces make her wary. But they pass. She's found her rhythm again, in small routines and big dreams. She's taken to journaling, to writing letters she may never send, and to planting sunflowers along our front path because they always reach for the light no matter how hard the wind tries to bend them. She still carries scars, visible and invisible, but she carries them with dignity, like armor made of truth. I watch her sometimes from the window, sketching quietly in her chair, and I feel this ache in my chest, not of pain, but of awe. She didn't just survive what Karen did. She transformed it into something bigger than all of us. A movement, a wake-up call, a mirror held to a society too comfortable in its own silence. And as for me, I've come to understand that justice isn't a moment, it's a journey. It doesn't end when a verdict is read or a sentence is handed down. Justice is found in the daily decisions we make to see one another, to protect each other, to speak when silence would be easier. I used to think the worst part of our story was the gunshot, but now I know it was the quiet before it. The looks, the warnings, the excuses. That's where the real danger lives, in the space where apathy grows. Because cruelty doesn't thrive on hatred alone. It thrives on neighbors who look away. So, I leave you with this. If you ever find yourself standing in a quiet, clean neighborhood with perfect lawns and perfect smiles and invisible rules, ask yourself, who gets to feel safe here? And who's being quietly erased? Because safety built on exclusion isn't safety at all. It's a lie wrapped in decorum. But when we stand up, when we speak up, when we choose courage over comfort, even the most powerful Karens fall. And the children they try to silence? They rise. They roll forward. They bloom. Just like Ellie. If this story hit you in the heart, don't scroll past it. Share it. Talk about it. Let this be the moment we stop letting people like Karen hide behind fake rules and silent neighbors. Because what happened to Ellie shouldn't happen to anyone. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe to HOA, Denied Access, where we expose the truth, fight for the voiceless, and tell the stories that HOAs wish you'd never hear. Because silence protects abusers, but sharing the truth, that protects everyone.